If you try to automate every part of your job, eventually you'll run out of stuff that you can automate and you'll still have stuff that you can do. Across generations, it's pretty difficult to synchronize strategies or philosophies for approaching the world. Different parts of the world are going to have different demands for attention, and these are going to develop different parts of our spirit. Timing and ancestry also play a role. I've been a software engineer who got my start working on business logic, so the scope of focus that I've had for the past 14 years has been thinking about how businesses use software. Software might be able to do 99.99% of a business's work, but the branding is still going to be there. And that's probably not 99.99% of a company. Or the branding isn't 0.01% of the company. This kind of means that everyone at a company is a personality hire, and the goal is to find people who can work together and motivate each other to create. There's an idea that people who are motivated to create would be doing this regardless. Like if you're interested in doing something, you'd be doing it even if you don't have money. Having money makes it possible to do different things, and the world of what you would do with resources and what you would do without resources is different than your actualized world when you do or don't have resources. And part of this is the social demands and contemporary economic demands of the people around you are going to change and influence the capacities that you have. Something that we can do as workers is spend an amount of time studying something deeply, then an amount of time applying the things that we've learned. I'm not sure if the captains are going to read that right because I messed up the word. Spend some time applying the stuff that you've learned. And I also don't know if I messed up the pronouns there. Part of my strategy has been to learn in school, apply the stuff that I've learned in the actual workforce, and then teach the stuff that I've learned. And I've made thousands of posts and hundreds of videos with hundreds of hours of content and years of attention towards this concept. It would help to be compensated for that amount of work, and I understand compensation doesn't really work that way. Like, how do you gauge the quality of the posts that I've made? Most of my posting has been in the past 2 years, and I've been a software developer, software engineer for the past 14. I would say past 10, I've been a software engineer, and I've been a software developer for the past 14 years. Around 2016, I began applying the stuff that I learned in my engineering classes to software, electrical engineering. Anyway, you can make videos like this and post them onto YouTube, and Gemini can summarize them, and people can listen to the entire thing or just read the summary. Different people are going to have different listening needs or goals at different times, so it's a good idea to get the hang of this kind of content. Cheers. I've been writing code for 14 years, and I gotta say, it's a lot easier when it's interesting. I started writing code around the time that I was 14 to understand myself and the nature of the universe and find ways to communicate and navigate the confusing elements of business. I wanted to make sure the structures that were useful, I wanted to make sure that the structures that were useful for business communication in my family were well designed. At that time, I was naive about what was easy and different technologies that made it easy. How do I say that? Some of the technologies that have come out since the time that I started coding, since the time that I was 14, some of the technologies that have come out in the past 14 years have made it a lot easier to do what I was trying to do. I was trying to express the design goals that I had consistently and make them accessible to other people. Not knowing how difficult this was motivated me to pursue the difficulty, to navigate it, I should say. I was pursuing the goal, and the difficulty was something that I had to navigate. If I were to just give somebody the result of that exploration, I wouldn't be transferring the problem-solving skills that I navigated. I would be giving them a reason to believe there's less of the world to explore. LeetCode has been used in tech interviews for a while. These are solved problems. They aren't the only solved problems that you can describe, to get onto a software engineering team. There are enough problems that you might as well solve new ones, and there are experienced engineers who are trying to solve old ones. Developing taste requires practice and time. Cheers. I developed a lot of my skills because I was stressed about the financials of my family, which it's just difficult to have a small business. Also, life can be expensive for other reasons, and placing the debt of college, trying to figure out where that was, has just been on my mind and stressful. Theoretically, the skills that I have are applying theory to the context of my parents' businesses. The reason this hasn't really happened recently is because we don't share language entirely about the significance of media. And I mean various media. My approach tends to err on the strict science and engineering side, and my parents' approach tends to err on the side of social sciences. I should say social services and communication. Another dimension of our communication is impacted by how confusing it was to grow up in a spiritual environment that was different than theirs. Just naturally, needs and environments change over time, and the context of the reasons why different structures were necessary changed in community. Growing up, it meant different things for us to ask what it meant for the nature of God to be a person, and that has a lot of historical context that I'm not going to get into here right now. There's a lot that can be said about the personhood of God and the significance of describing divinity with that lens. Anyway, that's hard to talk about because when I do, very often if I'm making a video and it is heard that I'm talking about my experiences, sounds will be made to not hear me talk about what I'm talking about. Sometimes noise is also made when I'm having conversations with people, and sometimes when I'm having conversations, I'll be asked to change locations, and it's just really not an environment that makes it easy to communicate with the people who I need to if I want to be employed in the thing that I've studied for 14 years. And my skills are pretty expansive and applicable to a wide range of topics, but people don't want to work with somebody who is sad and feels defeated. And that's the tone that I convey when I'm talking about the reason why I studied something and I'm interrupted frequently. My goal is to make enough content and be heard by someone who has the resources to help me navigate the world. If I want to have uninterrupted conversations in a positive mood, I need to be able to pay for transportation to a location and back, and plan for that time and be able to do the stuff that a person would do in those spaces, while also weighing the amount of money that I spend doing whatever against what makes me effective in my current role. Going through high school, I felt increasingly isolated and depressed, and a lot of this was trying to figure out where spirituality fit with the experiences that I had with peers and my family and development and time and longevity and purpose, etc. I noticed that I can contextualize some of the experiences that I had and provide direction to people who might need that motivation. I noticed that I can use some of my experiences to ground what some of the experience, I don't know how to say this. Things got better for me and can improve for someone who was who is in a similar spot to where I was. It is so necessary and urgent to provide that message that that's what I'm focused on. Being able to say, copy the videos that I've made for the past 2 years, and you'll at least have 2 years of your time occupied. That's what I can say. If I stop and expect value from stopping, then people won't be motivated to start creating for the sake of creating. So I'm asking you to support my work so I can keep on doing it. Thank you. Something that I learned in college is that the stuff that you focus on changes the stuff that you learn. This seems obvious until you think about how many people are focusing on getting a degree instead of learning the stuff that they're being exposed to in college. Parts of this are human nature. If we design a goal, then people are going to work towards that goal, and there's a certain amount that we can describe to a lot of people before the thing that we're describing changes. Talking to a lot of people is just often different than talking to one person. Some subjects are easier to learn by looking at the kinds of structures that would be placed onto a worksheet throughout a course. So without even looking at or learning the stuff that's being taught, looking at the ways the worksheets would be formatted can teach a lot. Other subjects wouldn't make as much sense without hands-on labs. Without discussions to describe the phenomena that were experienced, some of the topics can seem too abstract. Some of the jobs in our society exist to manage scopes of abstraction, and making sure there are channels for people who like that to explore that. How do I say that? If there's only one role in society, then everyone's going to have that role in society. Ideally, we would structure courses for different roles in society, but it's impossible to know how you're going to feel about a role before you've had it. There are some ways that we can empathize with people who describe their roles, although we aren't necessarily going to have their experience. Software engineering can be very abstract and is often the language about complexity. When we don't need to navigate complexity and we know that we can avoid it, we often don't, and figuring out when this is going to happen can be difficult. Through some course of history, having a vinyl record collection changed utility. Software engineering as a field will develop as people's taste changes, and this is the way that we relate to complexity as a society. I improvise these videos so I can make polished versions later and give those to people who pay for content. I would appreciate if you support my work so I can let you know when polished versions are available. If more people support my work, I can get those out faster. I figured out the advantage of supporting my work is getting to know the stuff that I make early, and sometimes that means that you learn the stuff that I'm doing at all. I try to make it available, and oftentimes the stuff that I'm focused on works better when multiple people are aware of it, and I can't really time all of that when my audience is spread out so wide. Support my work so you can learn when you can be available for different kinds of things that you might be interested in. Thank you. Cheers. If you want to automate your life, you need to be able to describe your life so you can describe the parts that you automate. This is assuming that you care about the quality of the stuff that you experience. Being able to describe the stuff that you would like is code. Encoding subjective quality into language is what software engineers do. We take slices of sensory data and represent them as code. This means the floor of automation is always going to be the least complex language that people are willing to learn towards code. The natural languages of the world evolve to carry meaning at different rates, and the policies of their jurisdictions, of the jurisdictions that tend to originate these languages, this really depends on the language. Different nations that produce media consumed by other parts of the world, and different parts of the nations that create laws are going to dictate how languages develop in the future, in addition to the ideas and motivations propagated through the populations using these languages. Some natural languages can pretty easily adopt structured language, so code means different things if you include natural languages' capacity to influence the structure of output in relation to input. How much complexity you can consistently move through media will depend on your experience navigating complexity and interacting with media. With this, I would recommend software engineers learn how they would relate to Paint, and also practice producing digital media. Make videos, draw with a stylus if you can, generate images and develop a style. Ask AI to interpret your images to see which symbols you can consistently construct towards meaning. See if you can annotate your images towards consistent visual structures that are recognizable and point towards styles people would want to explore. I think we can create a world where people can optionally engage with cycles of intensity and cycles of memory, and this can be a pattern towards sustainability. Organizing people has been challenging because dues are recognized differently by different audiences. Some people have contributed a lot of work that hasn't been recognized, and others have a relation to acknowledgement that is difficult to sustain, have a relationship to acknowledgement. Anyway, if you practice talking about the stuff that you do, then it gets easier to do the stuff that you're describing, and that pattern, that cycle of reinforcement, is how we can program ourselves. I've been working on multiple websites and I've been seeking funding for them. I'm not sure if I've described the value that I provide the general public. I hope that people check my profile and see the videos that I make and interpret that I'm describing something they can do themselves. Benefits I've encountered are I've met a lot of cool people through the process of creating stuff because other people create stuff too. And we can talk about the stuff that we make, and that's pretty fun. I also appreciate planning longer projects because it gives me something to look forward to in the future, and I can organize some of the scrap material that I would otherwise imagine as waste. Being able to navigate my own environment with an idea that the stuff that I'm producing isn't only wasteful and can be useful for something in the future is so helpful. And having dozens of websites that I'm working on makes it possible for me to imagine incorporating different dimensions of anything that I'm doing. I reflect on the time that I spent drawing with people in Chicago and the different personalities in the different neighborhoods. I'm starting to run out of steam in this video. My plan is to stitch this with other videos that I've made and uploaded to TikTok, and then ask Gemini to summarize a compilation. I'd like Gemini to summarize the videos that I've made in a day, so I can read that summary and produce a script that's more entertaining. And that's going to be where other creators can relatively accessibly chime into something that I can use to point to their work. I can point to other people's work, but it sounds like an ad when it isn't connected to something that's been valuable and describes the reason why engagement would be rewarding. So I'm also hoping that a creator hears this and keeps in mind that we can collaborate on something that produces some value, and there are structures, and I've done this before. It's easier when we actually share time, and I'm hoping that somebody contributes funding so I can make that more possible. Thank you if you make that possible. Cheers. When my parents say that I'm being selfish, I invest more of my time into the general public, who also doesn't compensate me for the time that I spend. But at least the videos that I make for the general public can help someone, and I've met people who also make videos. The work that I do is necessary because the current pattern in society is to burn out software engineers, which means we don't have a lot of experienced software engineers where we need them. This also includes social software, and there are people who navigate this professionally as media producers. Currently, education is changing, it has been changing, and the needs of our future depend on where people are paying attention. So it makes a lot of sense for me to continue making videos for the general public regardless of being compensated. If I actually want to make it through the gauntlet of the employment process, I would need to have the stamina, which costs money. Sometimes I can record and edit like 20 minutes of videos in a day where I'm improvising the stuff that I say, and theoretically the things that I improvise would be relevant for a larger percentage of the people who I consider on a day-to-day basis. Because of the ways that we embody cognition and the things that are on my mind, if I improvise videos for the audience who I consider, they're going to be relevant for the audience who I'm thinking about. I do need funding though, and I lose followers when I ask in a way that doesn't seem, I don't know, it's awkward. So I'm probably going to structure the ways that I ask for money. I'm not entirely sure what the most effective way to do that would be scalable is. Some of the platforms that people are familiar with for raising money contribute to the broader systemic problems of people who need resources not being able to access them. A lot of stuff was complicated when I lost housing a couple years ago, and I would basically need an amount of money to patch some of those holes. So if you can send an amount of money that would make it possible to think about the world in a different way, I would appreciate it. Otherwise, having $100 per week for a few weeks would be astronomically helpful. So if you can, that would contribute to transportation and digital rent. If we've had a conversation on a TikTok live, I really appreciate it. It's been difficult to be present. It's been difficult to be present throughout all of the stuff that's changed. More stuff is changing, and we can build a better world, and it is going to take effort, and the status quo is entrenched for a variety of reasons, etc. Our DNA is like not that many percentage points different than a bird's, so I feel like we're pretty close to a significantly different future, and we can build towards a better one. Cheers. How are we going to not talk politics if politics are the reasons everything is contoured the ways that it is? If there's a reason for us to exist that we can agree on, that's cool, and we can work towards it. But there isn't a reason to exist that we can all agree on, and we need to work towards something. Choosing when to reconcile the differences in value is politics. I grew up in a family that doesn't talk politics quite, and well, we do sometimes. It depends. It depends. And this is the thing that's frustrating. I want to say that we don't talk politics, and then I reach into my back pocket and then think about a conversation that we had where we were talking politics. And difficult conversations become harder when they're about things that become harder when the difficult conversations aren't had. I wonder if we can come up with a definition for what politics are, then talk about social dynamics, or economic dynamics, or other dynamics. Coming up with words for things and then not talking about stuff because the word that we came up with exists doesn't make sense. I'm more curious to talk about specific dynamics. Like when I mentioned that I was getting screened for ADHD, why did my job give me a deadline to justify needing an accommodation if the accommodation that I asked for was some days without meetings at a company with an unlimited PTO policy? It becomes politics when our politicians are describing how the dynamics are so intertwined. How much do drug commercials influence our ability to recognize cause and effect? Does that depend on the generation? Is that going to change the shape of TikTok? My actual advice is to paint with your kids and learn to navigate abstraction. Sharing language with software can point to some ancient wisdom. Software can have some unfortunate relationships with politics. Cheers. Computer science often deals with time and space, and people are often compensated based on the time they spend. Space is finite, and our computers have memory. Our economy exists to maintain motion across cultures. As we age, the bacterial cultures within our guts change. This is kind of how we relate to the land that we inhabit and the nations that we acknowledge. Software engineering as a language of complexity includes some elements of cultural interaction that change over time. I've been describing how you can spend 2 years developing your skills. Specifically, I've been demonstrating this concept with the amount of videos that I produce per day and the subject and the ways that I focus on actual projects. At various times, I've announced the identities of these projects, but they've become less relevant for me to announce as different people have become familiar with them, and I can focus on specifically when I'm updating about the underlying code. As I've met more developers, I've needed to code less because partially I've already written a lot of the code that I would write, and also being able to communicate with other people who understand the philosophy of why things would be structured in a particular way is helpful. Like the reasons why you would learn Rust to a certain extent, and also understand how TypeScript is used socially in the modern development environment landscape, is an indicator of a specific kind of seniority. And if you have a GitHub and we have a conversation that describes relationships in that kind of way, then that's clear. Some people make videos about their relationship with technology, and it's easier to see how they relate to the it's easier to see how they relate to the development space. A large part of software engineering is philosophy, and representing the significance of this is difficult. Computer science as a domain has a lot of abstraction, and in vacuums of concrete definition, different forms can fill the space. This particular video is about how my web presence can be compressed. How would somebody summarize the value of the things that I make meaningfully if they can't summarize all of the videos entirely? So I'm distinguishing the entirety of my production from the meaning. I can mention 8,000 posts on TikTok and describe that this video is intended for TikTok to suggest an amount of effort that I put into communicating a concept per moment. And I can also stitch a series of these together with a CapCut logo at the end of each video to indicate pace and aggregate dimension. So if I'm describing that this video is meant to be an indicator of compressibility of the squashy concept, I'm considering what that means in the context of one video and one compilation. I've already queued parts of the compilation, and it's currently, I believe, 21 minutes long, approximately. I believe that regularly discussing old content can make it possible to consider new perspectives on things that have inspired creative production. I already know that I'm not going to want to revisit all of my old content. I know I've made at least thousands of posts on the internet. Thousands of days makes me feel like at least 3 years can be accounted for. I believe I can make at least 20 minutes of content per day. It's also difficult for me to control my environment, and funding would help for that. Being able to schedule time and go places and focus on different parts of value production would be helpful. Also, having the top of my mind not be worrying about bills would be helpful for durations of time. I'm recommending software engineers make videos describing what they practice and also playlists of which videos inspire them to consider their careers in a new light. Create groups where you post dimensions of exploration and have conversations live about what you're interested in. Also have conversations about your career and post about reconciling the difference between which activities charge your batteries and which activities make it possible for you to engage. Also, which batteries are depleted at different times. I use the battery metaphor because I studied electrical engineering in university. I didn't get accepted into the major, nor did I graduate in electrical engineering. But I did study electrical and computer engineering for about 2 years, and I participated in a research lab in the Photonic Systems Laboratory. I reflect on these experiences often, and this is the domain that I want to reinforce. So as part of my story, I do say that I studied electrical and computer engineering in conversations when the focus is about the topical development. I don't have conversations about degrees much because I'm not sure what they mean, although degree programs are more helpful to talk about. More people have participated in degree programs than have degrees. More people have participated in the process of getting a degree than there are people who have degrees. If we want to build a better world, we need to make sure the people we hire into roles that require excellence are motivated to develop excellence in that particular domain instead of trying to demonstrate the ability to complete a process. There are ways to use computer science and physics to describe why deterministic processes for creative or divergent, I don't know how to say that. As humans become more advanced, our deterministic processes are going to account for less of the complexity we encounter. Having deterministic processes for the sake of tradition is beneficial, so degree programs and the diversity represented in the topical focus is still something that I would recommend preserving. I would like to go back to school. That is a goal that I have that is part of my character arc. I'd like a degree and I would like a graduate program experience. I'm curious about grad degrees. I don't have an undergrad degree, and I want to have a conversation about what it means to have an undergraduate degree. At one point, my dad said that I would need to pay back the Parent Plus loans because I didn't get a degree. And that made me sadder, and that influenced some of the decisions that I made, which is a different system than should or shouldn't anyone get a degree. Describing the theoretical value of a degree, even within my own family, changed before and after each part of the decision and experience process. Anyway, this segment is longer and is going to take longer for me to process. The thoughts that I've had, I've processed into this video. My plan is to post this to TikTok and stitch this and post this to YouTube or Google Drive. Then summarize the video into useful segments for software engineers. I've been analyzing the videos that people like to watch on TikTok over the course of making like 8,000 posts. So if I just want people to watch the video and I don't care about what they learn, then I could make slop. I hope I don't make slop, so I try to focus on providing value, and I put a lot of effort into that. You can watch some of my earlier videos on YouTube and see the differences in the process. Also, I'm not in the creator fund for any of the platforms yet, so if you can support my work, I would really appreciate it. I do tech consultations, and you might prefer videos about a topic so you can explore it in more detail before we have one. I've been pretty lenient about giving my time to people, and in the process, I have learned a lot about which things to emphasize and which things people actually care about. And I have learned that I don't have the battery to do that indefinitely. I hope this video and the others that I've made today describe direction and my approach to leadership. I'll continue to describe what I've been building, and I've posted about it, and I'm seeking funding for those projects into October and through January. In the meantime, I'll be honing my skills and exploring media with other creators. Cheers.